everyone, and welcome to our latest global discussion forum. Should be fascinating this morning, I think. We're very fortunate in having two excellent keynote speakers. The first is Charles-Henri Gallois, who is a graduate of the EM Lyon Business School in finance. He's currently a finance director in a large company, and he's worked internationally in places like Spain and Switzerland. He's been politically committed to Frexit, as they call it in France, for more than a dozen years. He's the author of some books that I can recommend: The Economic Illusions of the European Union and Our Great Challenges of the 21st Century, Energy and Immigration. These are two things that I think will resonate with a lot of people around. Critically, he is the chairman, the leader of Reprenons le contrôle, literally, let's take back control of France. This is a party whose aim is to secure a referendum on France's membership of the EU. I can tell you he's also denounced the scandal of what he sees as French state-indexed borrowings and the colossal mismanagement of the financing of the EU's recovery plan. Highly knowledgeable individual, highly personable, a good friend. So I would like to introduce Charles-Henri for his 5-minute intro to his thoughts.
Thank you, Lay. Thank you, everyone, to be here and to listen to me. I will be quite quick and try to introduce you what is at stake in France and across Europe right now. We have been through two phases. 2016 for, let's say, patriot or sovereign parties was an amazing year because you had the Brexit referendum, of course, plus a Trump election, which means it's possible to take back control, and it's possible also to win against the mainstream media. So it was, let's say, a big hope for Europe and for European nations. Right now, it's a bit, we have been through difficult years from 2016 to, let's say, 2022, because, of course, they tried to demonize Brexit. If you look at, articles or even TV information about Brexit, it's like a big caricature. They will say it's the disaster and so on. And of course, when you go back to the facts, and you may know it, the economic performance of for the UK is better than the Eurozone one. So if it's the catastrophe and the disaster in the UK and the Brexit UK, I would say it's the apocalypse in the Eurozone, but they will never tell that. So there is this big propaganda. They are tending to say that the British regret Brexit. They want to go back into the EU. You have all this little music to make other countries, of course, reluctant to leave the EU. But now you have also all the Ukraine-Russia war, all the purchasing power issue, all the relocation issue that we face across Europe and, of course, in Germany because of high energy price. Those mentalities is changing. If you look at the poll, of course, Brexit is not, let's say, at more than 50%. According to the polls, between, let's say, 36 to 40%. But you have other polls which are interesting. If you take polls about referendum and EU membership, it's 63% French that are in favor of it. If you take polls about taking back sovereignty on immigration, energy, on all the different fields, there is almost 70% of the French that want to take back control about it. So let's say all the storytelling that leaving the EU is a danger is still working, but still, if you look deeply about what French people want, it's take back control. So you have to take that into account. And I think, and that's why I was also, it was not in the bureau, but I was for the parliamentary election, I was a candidate for a national rally. I think I lost from very, very, very few points. But I think the best way to take back control in France, it will be to have a party that want to take back control. Let's say that have a manifesto which cannot be applied inside the European Union, which is the case of the national rally one. I mean, it's not that it cannot be implemented, but we will face many hurdles from the EU regarding immigration, regarding energy, regarding purchasing power, regarding finance. So then you will have a clash. And I think if you have a clash and you want to settle it, the best way then would be a referendum in the European Union. And when you have a clash and you say, do you want me to apply the manifesto I was electing for? I think then you win the referendum quite easily, even if there will be the same exact usual propaganda from the mainstream media. I think it's the best way to take back control. And honestly, across Europe, and it's one of my last book, Immigration Energy, we face major challenges. And if you look at all the challenges, and it's of course what I said in my book, if you look at these challenges, the European Union will be always an issue. For example, if you take energy, I mean, for me, the best way for a country like France, you have not natural gas of a few, you don't have petrol. The best way to be energy independent, it's of course through nuclear power. And when you look at what the EU has done about nuclear power, they have always, because it's what the German wanted, they have always tried to kill nuclear power, which is, I mean, a crime against energy independence. So all the rules, even the rule of the European market of electricity, all the rules are done against nuclear power, and they are done to have gas and renewable, such as wind and solar energy, because it's the path the Germans wanted to go. So I think it's a big mistake, it's a huge mistake, and we are paying it now. So the EU will be a problem for energy. And for immigration, you know it, there are the EU rules that are an issue, but there are also the ECHR, which is a main topic in the UK right now, because all the rules of the European Union and the ECHR, it's done to favor immigration. I mean, it means that you cannot even expel some criminals, because they will say, you can imagine they cannot go back safely in their country. But the British and the French people, they cannot go walking safely in the street. Isn't it a problem? No. So I mean, it's a kind of jurisdiction now. It's what they call the state of right. But now I think there has been a big change in the state of right. Normally, the state of right, it aims to protect the majority of the people against the arbitrary of the state. Now, this concept or human rights and so on, it's used to favor a minority of people, illegals or criminals, against the majority of the people. So it's a total change of paradigm, a total change of mind. I think it's a big issue, and all this is totally mad. It's like illegal immigration, and you are impacted indirectly in the UK. Illegal immigration. How do you want to tackle illegal immigration if you are in the Schengen area, where it's literally written in it? The aim is to prevent the controls, not to control. So, of course, some people that will come through Spain, Greece, and Italy, they can come without issues in France, and after maybe in the UK or wherever you want. But the same if you expel an illegal immigrant, a criminal, or what you want, he can come back on the day after through these countries, and he will arrive in your country again without any control. So normally, I mean, control your border is one of the main attributes of sovereignty. So you cannot be a sovereign and independent state if you don't control your borders. And I mean, lastly, and small a message for the UK that you can take about hope and society. I think sovereignty and that's why we call our party Reprenons le contrôle, take back control. I think it goes beyond Frexit or Brexit. I mean, you can do Frexit, you can do Brexit, but then to take back control your sovereignty, it's much more than this. It's political will. You have seen it on your side about immigration, the issue you had, even if you have leave the EU because you have the ECHR, but you have also an issue about political will. And I mean, to be really sovereign independent, it's the same in terms of industry, in terms of energy and so on. And to be independent industrially or with energy, it's a work of 10, 15 years. So it goes well beyond Brexit or Frexit. So it means that the work is not done after Brexit or Frexit. If you want to have a proper independent sovereign state, it's a long run project. And I think it's what you are facing right now after Brexit. You still have to win the sovereignty battle in many fields, whether it's industry or immigration, for example.
Excellent. I'd like to ask a question or two before we throw the floor open to everybody. I think when you talk about the state of fright, it's what we call Project Fear, which we experienced in the UK prior to Brexit. So just to explain that for people. Interesting that you mention a few things there. Energy policy, which is going to become extremely important, we think, in the UK and also around the world as well, the independence of energy. You mentioned the ECHR and how without resiling from the ECHR, it will be almost impossible for us to control immigration. Can I just ask one question before we throw it open? Because around the world, people kind of think that the French are all in favor of the EU, all in favor of giving up their sovereignty. Can you give us some idea of the support that parties like yours have in France, and how you see that developing over the next few years?
No, I think it's almost the contrary. You know, there is a poll, I think it's even done by the EU, which is called Eurobarometer. And if you look at this poll, they try to assess the level of support for the EU. On the other side, you can see the level of Euroscepticism. And France is the top one in terms of Euroscepticism, the second one in Greece. So it's quite the contrary. France, after the UK, let's say the most Eurosceptic country. Then to be Eurosceptic, it doesn't mean to want to leave, and that's a battle. And if you look then at the electoral result, I mean the most important sovereignist party in France, it's a National Rally, and it's the first party in France that have done, if you can imagine, 37% at the parliamentary elections, the first round. But you know, the French system is different at the British one. There is a second round, and you had a coalition of all the parties against National Rally. But if we had the British system, so that your viewers can understand, I mean, first one with 37 and the other way back. If you had the British system, I mean, you will have a national parliament with maybe 500 deputies of National Rally out of 577. So a big way bigger than the one you had for the Tory or for the Labour, because it's the first party in French by far. So it's not true to say that the French would be Euro supportive and so on. It's just the media tell like for 40, 50 years, and they're trying to demonize Brexit, that if you leave, it will be a disaster. But at the end, if you look at the poll deeply, Euroscepticism level, what the French want to do and take back control on some fields, the French, I think, are the most Eurosceptic. Then it's more that they are afraid so far to leave. But I think you don't have a proper debate, and you never had a proper debate outside the last referendum in 2005. Remember that in 2005, the French voted against the European Constitution at 55%, even if it was even bigger, the propaganda, that for Brexit, because during Brexit referendum, you had the Telegraph, you had the Spectator, you had some media in favor of Brexit. In 2005, in French, for the European Constitution, 100% of the media were in favor. You even had one newspaper and so on in favor of the no, and the no have won at 55%. So I think there is a big level of Euroscepticism in France. Then it's more to have the situation and the moments to have this referendum and to win it. And I think the best way will be after a clash with the EU about some important fields.
Yeah, I can certainly vouch for the fact from our research and looking at, you mentioned the Eurobarometer, which is an EU Commission scheme that they run every 6 months or so. And you're quite right. The French people regularly appear either at the top or towards the top of Euroscepticism. But of course, the benefit of our worldwide audience, Euroscepticism doesn't necessarily translate into France leaving the EU, and I guess that's the battle that you're facing. But now I want to open it up to the floor, and my very good friend from Australia, Anthony Carr.
I was interested. You mentioned the 2005 EU Constitution referendum, because I was at a dinner with the Consul General of Sydney a week before the actual vote was taking place. And I asked him, and he was, of course, full of all the wonders of the EU. And I asked him, how did he think the vote would go? And of course, at that stage, the polls were showing that people were running against it. And he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Oh, it is lost, but it does not matter." And it didn't matter because the Treaty of Lisbon, they went and implemented it anyway. So my question is, what are the constitutional changes that, A, permit the EU to override the French Constitution, and B, can be changed to prevent it overriding the French Constitution? Look, in Australia, to change our Constitution, you need a referendum with a double majority, a majority overall and a majority in the majority of states, which means that most of them fail, and that's a damn good thing, I can tell you. But it seems to me that the constitutional structure makes no difference. The EU trundles along, and there's no formal way, as far as I'm aware, that the French have agreed to effectively modify their own constitution to allow the EU to override it.
Thanks, Anthony. So over to you, Charles-Henri. Question is about how the EU is able to override the French constitution.
So there are two, let's say, what happened. Normally in the French constitution, you cannot unrespect a referendum. So what did they do? And then take into account that you have two ways to modify the constitution in French. Unfortunately, it's not only referendum. The other way is to have together the deputies from the nation and the Senate, and to have a three-fifths majority and to modify the constitution. But still, with the current constitution, you cannot ditch a referendum. What they did to go away legally and to do it legally, they ditched the European Constitution, and they bring another treaty with some changes. So they change some lines, they change, they ditch the flag of the EU, or the EU anthem for France, they ditch it, and they get it through the parliamentary way with the three-fifths of Senate plus deputies. So that's how they did it, and that's why in France we do not need a referendum, another referendum about a EU treaty or referendum to know if we want more or less EU, because it's quite the same. You can ditch it, you bring another treaty, and the way the way the life goes on. What we need to have is really a referendum about EU membership, because as you have to abide legally to a referendum by a French constitution, if you have a referendum on EU membership, if you vote no, so it means if you vote to leave, there is no legal or constitutional way to avoid it and to dodge it, as they did with the 2005 constitution referendum. And what you told about the polls, it's quite interesting, because the first polls, it was by the end of the year 2004. If you look at the first poll on all the propaganda of the media, the yes was winning at 69%. Yeah. You had a great campaign, and at the end we won at 55. So it means that a referendum and the proper debate on the EU can really change the mind of the people.
Yeah, unfortunately, it made no difference. That's the thing that's so annoying. You know, the people said no, but the Treaty of Lisbon implemented anyway. Quite disgraceful. Sorry, I have to put that in.
No, it's a democratic disaster. It's even a nightmare. I mean, normally no democracy should allow it. They done it legally through this trick. But if you talk about democracy and democratic principles, it's a total scandal. So I definitely agree with you, and it's why the EU trying to do that now. They ignore referendum, or they do people vote as it happened in Ireland again and again until they say and they vote the right way. And you know, the path of the EU, whether it's in Georgia or Moldavia, they only agree now a result even of an election, of a referendum, if the vote is in favor of the EU. Otherwise, they will say the vote is rigged and so on. So they did exactly the same. They don't take into account the people will, and people vote now. If you vote for the EU, it's all right. If you don't vote for the EU, they will find a way to overturn your vote. So the EU is fundamentally anti and undemocratic.
We've got a situation now in the UK where farming has come up the political agenda, the news agenda, and there is talk of tractors descending on London. Now, for many years, we've been used to tractors blocking the main arterial roads of Paris, and that's been a tradition for many years in France. But we're now getting that in the UK. If I can extend it globally to countries like Australia, then there we have a problem with net zero, where the new net zero projects are taking over farms in Australia. So there's a lot of disquiet about that there. Can you just summarize for us very briefly how the farming industry in France is responding to the apparent threats against it, and what's the view of your party, Reprenons le contrôle, on that?
I mean, you know how much French like food and gastronomy and everything around the thing. So there is a major support French people for their farmers. And what we're currently facing, I mean, let's say with the current situation, I mean, the farmers are going to die. Why? Because you are doing at the same time free trade agreements around the world, and you import products that does not respect at all the same standards of net zero or whatever norms the EU are trying to implement it. So they are putting more and more standards to be applied by our farmers, which increase the cost, which makes it more difficult to produce. And at the same time, they will sign free trade deals with Mercosur, with all the countries around the world, and the food products that will be imported, they won't respect at all the same standard. So with these two phenomena, you are going to make your farmers dying. So I mean, the issue may exist as well in the UK because you have the net zero policy, even if you are out of the EU. I mean, you may have less standards than the EU or less norms, but still you do have. And I think even after Brexit, you have still done many free trade deals, and I don't think you have put let's say alimentary products outside this deal. So they are in competition as well with all the products around the world, which does not respect the same standards. So I don't know very well the Australian case, but I think it may be quite the same of the UK. When they are out of the EU, they should have some very environmental norms to be respected, and then they will import products that doesn't respect this norm. So it cannot work. And doing so, if you look globally, let's say food production is increasing a lot around the world, and the only part where it's dropping or stable, it's in Europe. So you will have it because of this normal replacement of European food from food imported around the world. I think it's a disaster for food diversity and even for your own sovereignty. As I told you, energy, but as well agricultural one. I mean, it's the basis of the sovereignty. If you cannot even feed your own population, it means that you depend on other nations to feed your population. If you have a disagreement with this nation, they cut it and you're done. So sovereignty, normally you should be independent in terms of food, and I think it's what French trying to do. What Napoleon said about agricultural matter. He said you should be self-sufficient, and then you export what's on top. But let's be self-sufficient in terms of food, and I think he was quite right on that.
Okay, I've got a question for you from YouTube. Would you agree that the French people tend to have this interesting mix of an attitude of loving freedom and liberty, but at the same time respecting and obeying EU rules, even if they think they're stupid?
I think it's more what the current politics are doing. I think the French people, if you ask them, you want to obey the EU, or you say, I don't care, I will do my own policy, the French people will say, I don't care, I will do my own policy. I mean, it's more the issue of the global elite in France that wants to be whatever happens, even if it's bad for France, they want to be in the EU, and they think the EU will favor them or something like this. But I think the let's say average French people, they don't really care about the EU. They're just afraid because they have been they told them about the EU, the euro currency. If you leave, it will be a disaster. If you leave, it will be a disaster. But if you ask French people on one matter, the EU wants that, and France should do another way, they will say, so we don't care what the EU think, and let's do our policy, and you will see if Ursula von der Leyen will come with weapons to Paris. I don't think so. So I think the average people, they're really more in favor of freedom and democracy, and it's more a question of politics.
Yeah, because we do have this
politicians.
We do have this sense of the French people being lovers of freedom, and should we say very unique in the way that they are extremely patriotic towards France. And yet we're not really seeing that yet in the voting in France. Although, as you quite rightly said in your previous response, the National Rally won the last election. That is not how it's reported in the UK, but they did win the last election. And had it been translated into a first past the post system, as in the UK, they would now be the government. Instead of which, you have a government with a prime minister who's been imposed on you by President Emmanuel Macron. And his party, the party of Michel Barnier, won 5.6% of the vote in the second round of voting. And to have a prime minister who represents 5.6%, it strikes us, and I think many Democrats around the world, and I'm talking to Australia, to Asia, to America here, that seems a very bizarre situation to have a prime minister imposed on the French people after an election whose party only won 5.6% of the vote.
Yes, I mean, there was not clear majority because you had to understand, on the second run, you had a coalition from the hard left to, let's say, the center-right parties, all against nationally. So if they would be consistent with this objective political alliance, they would have done a government from the far left to the center right. I mean, the coalition that they have done the second run. Then the left, center left to far left, they wanted to govern together. But they had no majority. Macron alone had no majority, and National Rally, because they were all against it, they had no majority. So what they have done, it's a strange and quite baroque government where Macron had an alliance with the center right. They have no majority, but there is no alternative majority. So there is this government, but this government can be defeated on each law. And actually, there are debates about budget, and the government can fall if National Rally and the left vote together to make the government fall. So we will see. We will see what happens. But I think maybe the government will be over just after the budget, because they have no majority for their budget. So they will use the tool, which is named 49.3. It's just an article of the Constitution, basically, which says that you can go over and against the Parliament's majority, but then the Parliament can do a censure motion, which means that you can make the government fall. So I think maybe it will happen, but the issue is that you cannot dissolve the National Assembly until 2025, because it's 1 year after the last one. So even if the government fail, we cannot have new election until 2025 summer. So I'm quite sure the government will fail at that time to have new election. But between that, we are in a strange situation where you have a government with no majority and with no, let's say, no support at all from the population. If you look at the polls, Macron is, 78% of the people are against him. So it's huge.
Okay, it's very interesting. We see a democratic deficit in France. Would that be fair to say that there seems to be a democratic deficit in terms of government in France right now? Would you agree?
Sure, because you don't have the support. I mean, there is no legitimacy whatsoever about this government. It's really the result of the election. I always say these elections have been stolen from the people because they have done this alliance. Then if they are consistent, they do a government together, but they don't do it. So it's just a coalition to keep their seats and to keep National Rally away. So it's not a coalition about support. I mean, the support vote was in the first round, and in the first round, it was National Rally 37%, and then the second one, they were not even at 30%. So, I mean, the first party in terms of support is by far National Rally. So then they have done this alliance. It's like in the UK, if you have the same systems, I don't know, Reform UK is first, and then you had a coalition from the Greens, Lib Dems, Tories, and Labour together. It's really what's happened in France. If you want to understand, it's like a coalition of all the party against reform. It does not exist in the UK, but it really what's happened in France.
I think you put that in excellent ways for people to understand, both in the UK and around the world, that what happened in France was a coalition of parties all lining up in the second round of your elections to defeat the most popular party in the first round. And that's what they achieved, in effect. I know, because I know you, that you're not an extremist by any stretch of the imagination. You believe in France, in the sovereignty of France, but you do have some concerns, as we have in the UK, about immigration. And I wanted to ask you this. In the last few days, we've seen some very disturbing signs in France. There were mass shootings, for example, amongst gangs, predominantly, it seems, comprising the immigrant community. I don't know if that's fair to say or not, but maybe you can inform us. But there do seem to be major concerns now amongst the French public about the lack of integration and the levels of immigration into France, which have parallels in many other countries around the world, particularly in the UK.
Okay, so I will quite quick on that. I think you cannot have a zero immigration, and you always have some immigration. But I think massive immigration is a huge problem in terms of integration, but also in terms of security. And you see it in all the European countries. You can think about Sweden, for example, where they have done massive immigration compared to the current population. I mean, in France, we do like 500,000 people coming each year, which is craziness for me. Why? Because 500,000 people per year, it's equivalent to the population of Toulouse, which is the fourth city in France. In 2 years, you've got Marseille, which is the second city of France, and in 4 years, you've got the equivalent of the population of Paris. So you can integrate, you can assimilate minorities, and a few people you cannot assimilate like whole population of a country, because when you have many people coming with the same origin, with a large number, they will live between themselves. They won't integrate at all. They won't take your cultural references and so on. It's not even something, sometimes they say it's about racism and so on. It has nothing to do. If tomorrow you bring 4 million people at one shot to Mexico, they will live the French way of life, and they won't integrate, because you will live your way, because it's the natural human being behavior and nature. So I mean, massive immigration it's a huge issue, and all the statistics shows it. You've got much more crime with foreigners. You've got it on the whole European countries. You just attach a statistic. According to the crime, it's a ratio from 1 to 3 to 1 to 10. According to the crime, so it has a security issue, and you see it definitely in France, and it can no longer going that way. 70% of the French, they want to reduce immigration, but the issue is that we don't have a political elite on the EU. The immigration for them is not, let's say, a problem. It's their project. And from that, I don't know if you follow the U.S. election. It's also a big point for Trump. And I have seen a very interesting interview of GDF05, the VP for Trump election. It was at a Rogan show, and he explained exactly why some people and why some elite in Europe want still to have immigration, even if it causes many issues. He says that when he was in the private sector, it was not for Trump at that time, maybe 2018. He was at a congress with the CEO of huge hotel chains in the US, and the guy told him, I hate so much Trump. So GDF05 asked the CEO why he hated Trump that much, and he answered, well, when Trump was in power, it decreased a lot illegal immigration, and now I have to pay my workers with American wage. Why? Because immigration is used to lower wages, and that's why you have some elite in Europe that still want immigration, even if the people are suffering, and even if you see that it's not working at all, it's a major threat for our countries.
Thanks, Charles-Henri. I see we've got several hands up now. We've got at least 3 questions for you. We've got AJJ McDonald from, I believe, Scotland.
It's great to talk to Charles-Henri. And if I may pick up on a couple of points. Firstly, I would say this point about cheap labour is one of the big factors which is behind the poor progress on implementation of Brexit in the UK, with the big corporates not liking the higher wages implied, although we have seen some wage growth. But my question to you, Charles-Henri, was about the French Parliament just now, and you answered it, in fact, before I asked it, about the next 3 to 6 months and up to the summer. But what implications will that have within the EU and within the EU Council? I note that Macron has proposed Stéphane Séjourné for France's commissioner, and presumably he's a yes man to Macron. So will that be destabilizing within the EU Council, do you think, or just carry on as normal with a very Europhile French commissioner?
No, I thank you for the question. I think it will carry on the same, because Séjourné is a very Euro fanatic like Macron. He was at the Foreign Affairs just before, and he was totally in line with what the EU wants and what the EU policy is internationally. So I don't think until we have a new government, maybe in 2025, it will be quite the same. And it's the same for the budget. They have just so far applied what Brussels wants in terms of budget. So they will try to have it in force, but then we will see if there is let's say a motion censure from National Rally plus the left. So we will see what happens. But basically, what Macron wants to do, he wants to do exactly what the EU is doing currently, and it's basically what the EU is doing. Whatever the result of the election, we go on. And it's, the contrary of democracy, but it's really what Macron is doing as well. We have lost the election. We are in a minority, but still we go on with the same policy. Exactly.
C'est fou.
Right.
C'est fou. But you note that in other EU countries which have had elections recently, you actually have, might one say, more Eurosceptic parties coming on top, but being excluded once again by coalition. So you see that in Austria, in Germany, in the States, in Germany. It's really quite worrying, and could possibly lead to civilian unrest in some places.
No, it's quite the same as in the Netherlands. They have in the government, but they have no majority. And Geert Wilders, in his original manifesto, he had a referendum and EU membership, but still, as it's a total proportional system, he was not sufficient within all parties. He had to do alliances with center-right parties, and he has to ditch that, and he's not really in power. So that means that it depends then on the electoral system of each country. I think, for example, in France, due to our electoral system, if Marine Le Pen, for example, wins the presidential election in 2027, I think then she will get a majority at the National Assembly. So she will be able to do what she wants. In Italy, it's quite the same. The system is difficult, and first they cannot do any referendum, and the referendum is the best weapon against Brussels on whatever topics you want to use a referendum. You can totally annihilate Brussels. And still, she had to do an alliances with other party among for example, Forza Italia, which are not Eurosceptic at all. So she has to deal with all these parameters. So far, you don't have in continental Europe a real Eurosceptic government leading government, except Orban. But Orban, it's Hungary is a smaller countries, and the issue is that they depend a lot on EU funds, which is not the case for France, which is a net payer. And by far in the EU, it's easier to oppose the EU when you are a net payer. When you receive a lot of money, that's the case of Hungary. So.
Thank you very much, Charles-Henri. I'd like to bring in Stephen Tripp. So I heard you speak earlier about nuclear power. That's going to be a big debate here in Australia. We've got an election coming up very, very soon, maybe within 6 months. It's currently banned here in Australia. Our opposition leader, Peter Dutton, is going to, or plans to, remove that ban and build about 6 reactors around the country. I was having a debate with someone from the other side recently, and they were saying, "Oh, it's not going to work here in Australia. It doesn't work anywhere in the world. There are countries that use it, but it's very, very small in regard to their energy output." That's not my understanding. My understanding is that France has about 70% reliance on nuclear power, and they actually have excess and they export it to other countries in Europe. Is that true? Is that the case? Is that the reliance that France has on nuclear power, and is it something that Australia should look at?
For electricity, it even goes until 80% of electricity production done by nuclear. And actually, we could have 100%, but we have, let's say, renewable imposed by the EU. I mean, renewable when it's hydroelectricity, it's well, because you can you can manage it like the nuclear, but when it's wind or solar, it's we say intermittent energy, so it doesn't work when you have no wind, and it doesn't work when you don't have sun. So maybe you have more sun in Australia that we currently have in France, but still at night when it's cold, it's not working. So what do? You use gas. Which even if you talk about gas emission, it's not good to have gas. So I think nuclear energy has two main advantages. It's cheap when you have it amortized and so on, which is the case of France. And then you don't have emissions. So even if you talk about net zero, it's better to have nuclear than to have other sources of energy. So I think you should definitely go for nuclear. In France, it's working. The issue is they have sabotage with the EU the nuclear. We could have almost 100% of electricity done by nuclear. And then when you have this cheap energy, it's much more easy to turn energy working with petrol or gas to turn it into electricity when it's cheaper. You don't do it because it's not cheaper so far. And I think the best way to have cheap energy, it's nuclear power. And let's say that currently we are working with nuclear plants of second or third generation, but you know that there's some research about fourth generation nuclear plants. And this nuclear plant, why it will be, let's say, a revolution in terms of energy, it's because you can use the waste of uranium to implement it. So it means that you totally make the waste of nuclear disappear, and you can use it and to have it into your mine. With all the waste of nuclear that we have in France, with this fourth generation of nuclear plant, if it's implemented, we can have self-sufficient energy with the current consumption of France, all energy combined with the petrol, gas, electricity, and so on. The power, it's with all the waste we have in France, it's the power of the current consumption during 2,000 years. So it's definitely, when you talk about independence, sovereignty, I mean, to have fourth generation nuclear power would change definitely the concept for human being in terms of energy and in terms of self-independence. It means that we wouldn't even depend on uranium, because with what we have in waste on French soil, we will be able to live during 2,000 years. So I think nuclear power is not a danger, it's not an issue. When you look at the statistic, you have less people dying from nuclear energy by far than wind, solar. I don't even talk about carbon or gas. So it's the less dangerous energy. And I think it's the energy of the future. So it has been a pity that we have in France sacrificed this during 20 years because of the EU. We live currently on the heritage of Charles de Gaulle, Pompidou, and still working with the Mesmer plan of nuclear power. We just have one nuclear power new, but we should be building new ones instead of investing billions and billions on solar or wind energies that are not working.
The way I see the constitution in the UK and I guess in France is that there are firms, businesses, there's households, and there's government. The administrative side of government in the UK was very much against leaving the EU. They saw it as a very strong route to prosperity, and we know the stories. I guess it's the same in France, that the anarch or the strong administrative side of government in France would be very much against the French departing from Europe in some form.
You're definitely right. I mean, not only these people, but also the French mainstream media. As I told before, I think during 2005, 100% of the media were in favor of the European Constitution. If we had a referendum about Brexit in France, it would be the same. 100% of the media would say you have to vote for Remain. So I mean, globally in France, the elite are in favor of the EU because some of them they think. I think it's a big problem. I mean, it means that the majority of your elite, they do not believe in your own country. They say that the country is finished and your future is only through the EU. So it's a big let's say moral issue. It means the people are still believing in France, but the elite, it's not the case anymore. So it creates really a big problem, and I think it's a democratic problem, even if it's not said that they do not believe in France. When you look at the fact, when you look at what they are doing in favor of the EU, it's a fact that they do not believe in your country. So it's not only a moral issue, it's also a democratic issue, because no one in France has ever voted to have Ursula von der Leyen deciding for you.
Can you give us a very clear statement of your party's position on whether you believe that France should leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
No, we should do it. I mean, we should definitely do it. Whether it's, I don't even think on that we need a referendum. I mean, for the EU, I think the best way is to have a referendum. Then for the ECHR, I think you can leave it even without a referendum, because if the people vote for you and for a manifesto when you want to lower immigration, I mean, it's normal to leave the ECHR. And people, you have all this propaganda in France about the EU, but the media and the people, they are not even in majority, they are not even aware of the ECHR and what are the implications of the ECHR. I mean, they don't really care about ECHR, but to belong and to be a member of ECHR, it does have consequences in terms of immigration. So I think we should leave it after entering in power, and you don't even need a referendum to leave the ECHR, because they are not, let's say, a big concerns of the people about it. They don't really care.
In a couple of days or so, we're going to have the US election. It's going to be a huge event. Are the people of France paying a lot of attention to the US election? Is it something that you just can't ignore? And from you personally, what would you like to see the outcome be? What do you think is in the best interest of France? Is it a Donald Trump presidency or Kamala Harris presidency?
Because I think most of the French people, they just see it, but they don't really care about it. It's just that you have a massive, I don't know why, you have a massive propaganda against Donald Trump in the French media. Yeah, actually, it's quite hilarious, because they talk about it like if France's future depends on it. They are like they will be crying if Kamala Harris is not winning. So it's a bit ridiculous. First, because they don't have any impact on the election. So it's quite ridiculous to have a propaganda against Trump in an election where French people don't vote anyway. So what's the point? But still, it's a case of you have this massive propaganda. And then I think when you think about the US election for French people, you don't really care about intern policy, what they will do. I mean, their own problem, it's sovereignty. I don't have to have an opinion or agree on the intern policy, but what will be interesting, it will be what they want to do in international policy, because it will have an impact on France. So I'm more in favor of Donald Trump victory. Why? Because I think one of the main issues for Europeans at the time, and you see it about energy, it's the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And he told about 24 hours. I don't think it will be 24 hours, but I think he can end quite quickly the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. It will be a good thing for Europe. Same if he can do it for the Middle East. Then you know that it won't be anything beautiful for French people if Donald Trump wins, because he will impose some tariffs, because the European Union has a surplus in terms of trade of 150 billions. So it's mostly Germany. France has not surplus with the US, but we will suffer from it because he will impose tariff to cut the German surplus. So in the short term, it won't be good for France on that. But I think on the long term, to have this protectionism and to have the idea of relocate industry and so on, if it can, as most of the time the Europeans they emit what the US do, if it can inspire our elite, it would be a good thing. And I think as well, more in cultural ways, the fight that Trump is doing against wokeism is quite good if it has some repercussion and impact on Europe. Plus Ukraine war, so that's why I think Donald Trump victory will be a good thing, and then Kamala Harris will do exactly what Biden have done. It means to fuel the conflict, Ukraine conflict. She won't change at all in terms of immigration as well. Donald Trump will cut it, and it can be an example for European elite. With Kamala Harris, they will still do massive immigration. So for this reason, I'm more in favor of Donald Trump, even if I'm not, let's say, naive. And I know that there will be also some drawbacks with Donald Trump for France. I think on the overall, Donald Trump would be a better solution than Kamala Harris, and with better consequences for France.
Excellent. We're at the end of our time. So what I'd like to do, Charles-Henri, is to thank you enormously for the time you've given us on a Sunday morning for the international audience. It's been fascinating, I think, getting a perspective. I can see applause coming from around the world, including Australia. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Je te remercie for parler en anglais. I want to thank you, and I think all of our audience appreciate the fact that English is not your first language, but nevertheless, you have presented an excellent case, I think, which is going to be very interesting. And I just want to invite you, just before you go, for your last thoughts about Brexit. How would you sum up how you and your party felt when the British people voted to leave the European Union? Can you give us something to be cheerful about this Sunday morning?
I mean, it was, except 2005, we didn't have that much victories in 2005, you know. I couldn't vote. I had like 16 years old. I'm still quite young, but still I was younger at that time, and I couldn't even vote. So as an adult and let's say a political memory, actually for me, Trump election, it was not this impact, and it was not about the use. The Brexit referendum, and above all with the first poll, YouGov poll that was given the Remain at 52 or 48, and still I was still on TV and watching at the result, and I saw leave. It was the best political moment of my lifetime so far. The Brexit referendum, it was amazing. And then after that, I have many British friends, so I was with Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. with my friend Alex Phillips as well in the European Parliament in Strasbourg for the last day of the Brexit Party delegation. So it was amazing, and as well I was in Parliament Square the D-Day when you left. I was there as well with the Brexit Party and Leave Means Leave members. So for me, it's a biggest. So far biggest political moment of the 21st century, and let's hope the second one will be when France leave the EU as well.
That's fantastic, Charles-Henri. You've given us a great soundbite to end on for us to promote. So thank you for that. Once again, I want to thank you for your time on a Sunday morning, for giving up your time to an audience that is fundamentally international. There'll be some French, but obviously not enormous numbers. And so you've done this to get the message out globally. And so I'd like to thank you very much for that. And you and I will always stay friends no matter what. We have a lot of friends in common, as you know. So
thank you. Have a very good day and a good Sunday to all.
Thank you. So there we had the leader of one French party that believes in independence and sovereignty. Now I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my friend Laurent Henninger, also from France, and also the co-leader of another French independence party, who has very interesting ideas. Laurent is a man with a very interesting background. He worked for the French Ministry of Defense, and is now, in fact, retired from that role, but highly respected as a military historian. Lives in Paris and devotes most of his time to this new party, which is called Mouvement Politque Citoyen. So the political movement of citizens, effectively, in English. A very erudite man, written novels, and I'm delighted to welcome him to the forum and for him to give us his views on independence, sovereignty, democracy, and freedom, and to find out how his party is going. So the floor is now open to you for the next 5 minutes, Laurent, and then our moderator will take over and field questions for you. So over to you, Laurent.
Thank you. Hello to everybody. So in 5 minutes, how could I present my movement? It's a very new movement. It was created only a few months ago. And the MPC, the main leader is Philippe Murer. He's an ex-member. He's an economist, actually, with specialization on ecology and environmental problems and energetical problems too, of course. We decided to create a new movement because we were not satisfied with what was existing. There are several, at least two big souverainist organizations in France, the UPR of Mr. Asselineau and Les Patriotes of Mr. Philippot. We agree with about 90 or 95% of what they say, of their political program, their political ideology, and so on. But the problem is that these parties are run by individuals, two individuals, actually. Nobody knows who rule these parties with them. I mean, the power in these organizations is far too much personalized, and we think it is full of dangers, political, ideological, practical too, dangers, and we aim to create a movement with more internal democracy and more participation of the militants to the elaboration of the program of the party. And that's our main reason. But, and also from that, we will promote as much as we can unity in general, in elections, or on some particular topics, with all the others who agree with us, including Filippo and Asselineau. And but the problem is that we already know that most of the time they won't agree. And but with the time, who knows, maybe we will succeed. So we try. That's the main. Those are the main points I could say about these about our party. There are several other points I could add, but I think they will come as answers to the forthcoming questions. Yes. Oh, yes. One other ideological main point. It is that we will try to be neither left nor right. We are open to everybody. We are ready to speak with everybody, including in the left or in the right. So we don't have ideological barriers. Furthermore, we think that if we have to enter a new century, it would be a shame and a passport to defeat to stay frozen on 20th century ideologies, the left and the right, to name them. We need to create something completely new. Therefore, we have to think, we have to sweat a lot, and to think. It will not be easy. It will not only be an intellectual work, because it will also be a very practical one. But we intend to bypass these old cliches. Those are the main, in a few words, since I have only 5 minutes, these are the main considerations I can tell you about our MPC.
Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Laurent. Just going to throw you over to Stephen Tripp over in Australia to come with the first question.
Thank you for those opening remarks. I see in your bio that you're a military historian. We're seeing a lot of conflicts around the world at the moment, including a conflict that's been going on for quite some time, the Ukraine-Russia conflict, which is quite close to France. And historically, I think it's significant as well. There are some people out there that are saying that we are already in World War III, and if you go back to World War II, it did take some time for that conflict to get going. What are your thoughts? Do you think it's that drastic that we potentially are looking at a global conflict if things keep going the way they're going?
Well, That's a tough question. Tough and tricky too. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is a very, very complex one. Perhaps even more than the Middle East. And I don't know how to say that, but in that conflict, I am definitely on the side of Russia. Maybe you don't want to listen to me anymore, but and I think that that conflict was provoked, literally provoked, by Washington and London. They want to destroy Russia as a country. That's my point of view. They want to do to Russia what they did to Yugoslavia in the 1990s, to make a few little ridiculous nations out of that big empire, and nations that they can control. I don't have any illusion about the power of Putin. I don't have any sympathy for him, nor with his power. And I am not paid by the FSB, neither, alas, I might add. And that could solve many of my personal problems. Anyway, I can't answer to that question in an easy way. I made interviews on French alternative medias on that question. Each time it took me an hour and a half to explain the complexity of these conflicts with a historical background. It's not a country with the good little country that is peaceful and attacked by the big with the big devil. You know, I've seen in the West since 2 years a degree of hate toward Russia and anything Russian, a degree of hate that was not in use even at the height of the Cold War in the early 1950s. It's absolutely crazy, a degree of hate and lies against Russia that is on the verge of either grotesque or racist. I'm definitely not on that side, definitely.
Can I just intervene for a moment here? And that is to say that we all at the Global Discussion Forum welcome freedom of speech. And what you've said, Laurent, will not go down well with many of our viewers and listeners. I can tell you that.
Yes,
right now. However, we believe in your right to say it. And that's important.
Mm-hmm. So I've said it. I was asked a question. I couldn't say it. I don't want to answer. I couldn't say it. But there are risks for it to transform into a major conflict. Some risks, not big risks.
And I'm now going to throw this back to Gawain because.
Okay, thank you, Lee. Thank you, Laurent. Ping it across to AJ McDonald.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Lee and Monsieur Henninger. Gawain. I wondered, Monsieur Henninger, what you thought of the EU competence in foreign policy, following on from the previous question, and possibly also a comment on the EU role in the Maidan in 2014. And if I can also ask what you thought about an EU defence, security and army in the context of NATO. Thanks very much.
Well, not only because Russo-Ukrainian conflict, but in general, we are strongly against EU foreign policy and defense initiatives. We are strongly in favor of a totally independent France with its own nuclear deterrence, its own armed forces, under the command of no one. We are in favor to at least coming back to what de Gaulle created in the 60s. That was to take France out of integrated military structures of NATO. At least we are in favor of that. And at best, in favor of going away from NATO completely. We are in favor of France as a totally independent country.
And how do you think public...
I might add to add some historical depth to my statement. France was created 1,000 years ago because it refused then to participate in the recreation of a Western Roman Empire. And since then, Central Powers, which were named during centuries the Holy Roman Empire, never accepted that. We are in favor of nation. We think that the nation state is the epitome of efficiency in terms of international relations. We hate definitely any empire. Empires are a danger. Empires are evil. Plus, empires are not Western. Empires are an Asian political concept. We refuse that. And the EU, and it's not by chance that they are led by Americans and Germans, EU want to recreate a new empire in Europe. We are against it, definitely.
So could I ask, how do you see French public opinion on that?
We think that the French public opinion is not very informed, because one of the drawbacks of the French population is that they are not very interested in international policy, nor politics. And they tend generally to either completely ignore it or to follow what the main press tell them to think. But we know from polls that were made a few months ago that 36% of the French voters are in favor of a Frexit, to go out of the European Union. 36%. That's not the majority, but that's a strong, very strong minority. And these people can't be heard. And worse than that, they can't find a political representation, because the souverainist people are only small, very small groups who can't do anything interesting in elections. We have 1-2% at best. It's impossible to do anything. So it's a very paradoxical and illogic and weird situation.
Your party, what are your views about immigration and about whether France should be controlled by the European Convention on Human Rights? Do you have?
Well, that problem is with the problem that we were talking about a moment ago, is the other big problem that leads us to think that we have to go out of the EU, because the laws of the EU and of the European Committee for the Human Rights state that we can't, it is forbidden to try to canalize and control the flows of immigration. The flows of immigration are big. They are, as Charles-Henri used to say some half an hour ago, it's possible to integrate and to accept a few immigrants, but huge masses of immigrants like that, no, it's not possible. So we have to stop it, to put an end to it, an absolute end, and that's why we are generally called the fascists, Nazis, or whatever. But what is interesting is that many ideological leaders of the left have, in several occasions, said distinctly, clearly, that they want to kill, eliminate, eradicate French culture. They want a global culture made of several cultures, including with a little bit of French in it, but nothing more. And they want to destroy it. That's what, for instance, Mr. Bernard-Henri Lévy or Mr. Daniel Cohn-Bendit used to say in several interviews. So, voila. They stated officially that is the reason why they want immigration to be a constant and huge flow in our country.
Thank you.
As in the rest of the world.
Thank you, Laurent.
Thank you, Laurent.
Gawain, just before you do, I thought we'd just get Stephen just to comment on that from an Australian perspective. And then I think you've got a question from another viewer. But Stephen, what were your views about that from Australia?
Well, immigration certainly is becoming an issue here again in Australia, and it's seemingly a big issue across the Western world. We're seeing that currently in the United States, their presidential election, one of the big focus is immigration and the people that are seemingly flooding the country across their southern border. We know Brexit was fought largely on immigration. You just spoke about this issue in France. It seems, since I've been involved in this global discussion forum, one of the things that seems evident is that a lot of the issues that we're facing in each one of our countries are overlapping. Where immigration is one example, energy policy could be another example, the response to COVID is another example. Where is this coordinated effort coming from, in your opinion? Is it just that our governments have very similar views, or is there other forces externally that are applying pressure on our governments and pressuring them to pursue policies like immigration, open immigration, and other things?
Well, both, I think. Both. The EU and many governments share this ideology. Plus, they are encouraged to do that by international foundations like the Soros Foundation. And I would not be surprised that many factions, many groups within some parts of the American deep state linked to the Democratic Party want to export the American philosophy of the nation. That is a nation made of juxtaposed communities, you know, with their own cultural trends and their own neighborhoods and all that, you know, Italian American, African Americans, Jewish American, German Americans, whatever, Cuban Americans, whatever. No, that's not the way we function in France. Not at all. France is a country where we are blind to color, to religion, and all that, where everybody is friendly, and all the other consideration belong to private life. So we don't want such a model of a society.
Okay, thank you, Laurent. I've got a question in that came in via email, and that is, which messages that your party and your campaigns resonate most with the ordinary men and women of France, as opposed to the intellectual, the elite?
For the moment, we have not many experience for the moment. For the moment, what people like is that we say, we insist on the fact that we would like to create a party, a movement with a lot of democracy and with the possibility for people to open their mouth within the party, within the organization, and in order to throw away the Macron government and to reconquer our country. To reconquer our country against the government that is the worst, and again, the historian is speaking, a government that has been, up to now, the worst government France has ever had in 1,000 years. The worst, and the most dangerous, and the most anti-French, along with Vichy. Really, Vichy is maybe worse than the Macron government, because Vichy persecuted the Jews. But a part of that, the Macron government is a catastrophe. And most of the people, of the leaders of, including Macron himself, are traitors, are foreign agents. Foreign agents. And that's why more and more people in France, in the country, ordinary people, believe. And they tell us so.
Thank you for that. I mean, when you talk about, just going back on that, when you talk on a government as being foreign agents, and responding back a bit to what Stephen was saying about is there an external force that is controlling these people, or are they self-inflictedly idiotic? Is it in the sense that when Macron started and En Marche swept the country in optimism, one wouldn't have thought that he was a foreign agent at that point. But now you feel that has it happened over time, or was he always like that?
I think France, because France is what it is for a long time, I think France is as the Prussian 19th century military theorist Clausewitz used to say, France is the Schwerpunkt of Europe, the center of gravity. Therefore, France has to be destroyed, the first and the most. And that's why the emphasis is put on France by these forces who want to create a globalist world. And these forces, these globalist forces, emanate from America, mainly, or from people, organizations, and who don't have any country anymore. People who come from the international banking and financial system. We definitely are not left-wing, but we think, and we definitely are in favor of capitalism, but a sane capitalism, not the hyper-capitalism that is ruling the waves for many years now. A hyper-capitalism based solely on finance and banking. It's a capitalism that plays casino with the money of the world. And that ultra-capitalism will have the effects in every field, the effect of communism. It will destroy capitalism, it will destroy the nations, and all that. And well, these are mainly the forces that we feel are behind that enterprise.
Okay. Thank you, Laurent. I'm going back to Australia and to Stephen to follow that up.
You spoke earlier about France having a 1,000-year history. Australia is far younger than that. We've been around for just over 200 years, and I think of Australia as having a tremendous amount of potential. We haven't been able to reach that potential, largely due to not bad government, but mediocre government. What's your view of France? Do you see France having more potential than what you've achieved currently? If you were to, I guess, regain your sovereignty, what is your vision for France in the future?
Well, I think we have a lot of potential, yes. Because our country is rich, and not only in terms of money, but in terms of thoughts, in terms of qualities of its people, including ordinary people. We have a lot of means in terms of energy, nuclear energy, for instance. We have great engineers in many fields. We had a great industry before it was sold to international and American groups. We have a great agriculture, which is about to be destroyed too. We have everything, plus we are at the middle, we are a bridge over several cultures. We are a bridge between northern Germanic Europe and southern Mediterranean Europe. We are a bridge. We are part of both. We are full of, we have armored forces that used to be, during centuries, among the best in Europe. We have had the talent throughout our history to integrate foreigners when they didn't come in huge waves. We integrated Jews. We integrated German immigration in the 19th century. We integrated a lot of Spanish, Portuguese, Polish, and Italian immigrations in the 19th and 20th centuries. We even integrated Saracens in the in the Middle Ages, in the High Middle Ages. We integrated a lot of Jews from Eastern Europe from 1905 on, that were fleeing the pogroms in the Russian Empire, and that in neighborhood where in the east of Paris, these Polish or Russian Jews were the best Parisians. They succeeded in assimilating and digest all the cliches about the French working class at the time, in the first half of the 19th century. And it was great. It was great, absolutely great. I was born in 1959, and I remember in my youth, in my prime years, in the early 1960s, I knew some of these people, and they were great. And and they were French, real French, true French, even more French than the French themselves sometimes. So those are the assets that we have, and we have many more. So we might not be able to be a hyperpower dominating the world, and at last we don't want it anyway. But we have assets to become a great country again.
We had a question from a viewer, which is your views on the French military, which you started to talk about. And I just want to be very clear. The view of your party is that France should not be a part of NATO. And I need your confirmation on that.
Yes.
Should it be part of the EU's defence union? And do you have any views on the development currently going on in the United Kingdom to align closer to the EU on matters such as defence?
Well, I didn't understand the two last questions, but okay. I first the first one.
Yes.
The first one
should
that
France
was
be a part of NATO? Secondly, should it be part of the EU's defence union?
No. For the EU defence union, no, definitely not. As for NATO, we are, some of us are in favor of going completely out of NATO. Some of us are in favor of, as I said, leaving the integrated military command of NATO, as it was in France from 1966 to 2000 something, when Sarkozy changed everything. We don't totally agree with that.
Let me just be clear.
Sorry?
Can we be clear for the international audience that France used to be a member of NATO, then it stopped being a member of NATO, and then it started being a member of NATO, and it is currently.
No. France was a member of NATO ever since the signature of NATO Treaty in 1949. France has never been out of NATO, never, including with de Gaulle. De Gaulle in 1967 didn't put France out of NATO, but the French armed forces out of the integrated military command of NATO.
Oh, come on.
That's different. But France was still a member of NATO as a diplomatic and strategic and political alliance.
Okay, but it didn't practically, it wasn't practically a member of NATO, and many people within NATO simply did not trust France with any of its military secrets. Is that not correct?
No, I don't think so. The main reason was that de Gaulle wanted France of the integrated military command because France had its own nuclear deterrence since the previous year, 1966, and he considered that it was incompatible when you have an independent nuclear deterrence to be part of an integrated military command.
So in practical terms, sorry to interrupt, but in practical terms, France refused to be part of the integrated military command of NATO. Now, most of the public will understand that as meaning, as I do, that France effectively wasn't part of the overall defense structure of Europe because it refused to be part of the integrated command of NATO. Am I wrong?
Yes, it was more subtle than that. As I said, but I'm going to re-say it, France was a member of the strategic and diplomatic alliance. That is, if a war had erupted in those days, in those years, between NATO and, let's say, the Warsaw Pact, France would have been automatically a part of the conflict, since it was a member of NATO.
Without being part of the integrated command structure of NATO.
But no, it was not it would have been part of the conflict along with other members of NATO's, but giving its own orders to its own armed forces, particularly the nuclear.
So not part of the integrated command structure of NATO, which means that NATO as a complete military capability would have been without France, because France would have made its own decision. Yes.
Yes, particularly for the use of nuclear weapons.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
We didn't want to have the system of double key that rules the British nuclear deterrence system, and we didn't want Americans to tell us when or not to launch our nuclear weapons.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just needed clarification on that, because I think it's quite important that, speaking as somebody with, far less military experience than you have, but without the command structure, without participating in the command structure of NATO, that made an enormous difference. So the fact that France notionally, by name, was a member of NATO really is irrelevant when it came to a conflict, because it wasn't part of the NATO military command structure for many years. That's true, isn't it?
No, I don't agree with that. And even many American military and political leaders didn't agree either with you, because they recognized in those days that attitude of the Mad Hatter that France had within NATO was actually a reinforcement of deterrence.
So can I just throw the floor open finally to everybody? Do you have any final questions for Laurent of the Mouvement Politque Citoyen? And I can see a hand up from Ben Phillips, so I'm going to unmute him. Ben is Deputy Chairman of CIB UK, and he has a question for you.
Laurent, thank you very much indeed. A fascinating outline. I'm just wondering, in practical terms, whether your party has much in common with the National Rally, for example, because if you want to assert political power in a practical sense, surely you're going to have to come to sensible coalitions with some of your rivals. I just wondered what your views on that were.
Well, in a way, you're right. We are very small. We are almost nothing. Maybe tomorrow we will be bigger, but we want to be as big as the National Rally. In any case, short of I don't know, a revolution or a main tsunami, like political tsunami like that. But I hope not. But the problem is that we know that the National Rally has completely capitulated on the main issues that we point. They have capitulated about the Frexit. They don't want to go out of Europe. They have capitulated about the euro. They want to keep the euro. They have capitulated in front of NATO, in front of everything. They are now a very, very mainstream party, they still say that they are against massive immigration. Okay, fair enough. Problem is that how, if they stay within the boundaries of the European Union, how will they enforce their policy in that matter. How? It will be impossible, completely impossible. So no, they still carry on the discourse about stating that they are against immigration and so on in order to keep their electors, to keep their voters. But they are going to betray millions of their voters on the day that they will arrive into power.
Okay.
That's very simple.
Oh, Laurent, I want to thank you personally as someone I consider a friend, even though we disagree about certain issues, that's fine, for addressing us all today, for addressing an international audience in English, not your native language. I'd like to thank you for doing that and for presenting some ideas, some of which will resonate around the world, others of which maybe less so. But we believe in freedom of speech, and you've certainly exercised freedom of speech today on a platform that will hit many, many thousands of people. So
thank you for that.
Thank you for giving up your time on a Sunday morning. You know I appreciate talking to you always. So thank you for that. I also want to thank our previous speaker, Charles-Henri Gallois, for his speech earlier on and for taking so many questions. I think this has been a very interesting session, a very interesting global discussion forum that perhaps has given people a different perspective on France as a country, as an independent, potentially sovereign country, which it is not at the moment, of course, because it's a member of the EU. And I think it's been absolutely fascinating, and I hope you all agree. So there we go. Thank you, Laurent, and thank you, Charles-Henri, who's no longer with us. But thank you both for this. We very much appreciate you doing this for the international audience. And there we go. So I think we're at
one very short word.
Of course.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you very much for letting me speak and for letting me use my freedom of speech. And I can tell you that it would have been impossible on a French media with a French audience. And that is one of the points on which you British people are definitely very good at.
Well,
your history is a testimony of that.
Thank you, Laurent, on behalf of the British people. I'd like to say that freedom of speech is safe in the UK. I suspect that many people listening to this will be deeply troubled about some of the moves. But certainly on all of the channels that we have, and there are many, freedom of speech is sacrosanct. It is incredibly important. Not just freedom of speech, but freedom of thought and expression. Very, very important. I love your country. I love France. You have a great tradition over the centuries of defending these values. And I think it's quite important to hear from French thinkers and philosophers such as yourself on these issues. I would just end on one final thought, which is vive la France, vive la différence.
Merci. Goodbye all.
Bye everyone.